Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 3 in my Clockwork Empires Alpha 43 series of video look at thingamajigs. I really seriously need a proper title for these things. I do these about once a month, every time Gaslamp Games releases another iteration or another version of Clockwork Empires to the stable branch. So the game has, what's going on over here? Quincy Patterhewer. Huh, looks like he's found the shore. Yeah, anyway, so Gaslamp Games provides two versions of Clockwork Empires for those who've purchased the game in early access. There's the stable branch and the experimental branch. So the stable branch is the one that updates about once a month with a whole bunch of changes, and the experimental branch updates frequently, like several times a month. But it's, as the name might imply, it's not as stable. So it's not as polished. The stable branch versions tend to be playable, right? And they're not. The experimental branch versions tend to be sort of proof of concept, or they're a forum for the devs to test new features and game balance and things like that. If you want something playable, you should probably stick with the stable branch. Anyway, so I'm continuing on this colony that I covered in episodes 1 and 2, although I was mostly not playing because I was talking about the new stuff that came in 43. From this point forward, having covered most of the new stuff, I can concentrate on playing. And I've actually skipped forward ahead in time as well, so I played a little bit before I started recording. So prior to this episode, I just had these three buildings, right? The carpentry, the kitchen, and the bunkhouse here, the lower class house. I've gone ahead and built a ceramics workshop because I have these clay nodes close by. I can turn them into bricks. I've also built the beginnings of a mine and the beginnings of a metalworks. My chain of thought there was that I've got the clay, so I can build kilns and stuff in a metalworks, and at one point I called in a naturalist to survey these mineralogical nodes. This one here is actually hematite, which is super close to the colony. So I figured I can dig up the hematite here, turn it into weapons and stuff here, and I've already got the clay and all will be good. Little did I realize, I did not have, I've dug up some hematite now, but at the time I did not have any hematite. And the mine shaft in the mine requires an iron ingot, not just raw hematite. It actually has to be, the important thing is that it requires an ingot. If you don't have an ingot, then you have to refine it out of raw hematite at the metalsmith. The problem here being kind of a chicken and egg situation here, right? I can't build the mine shaft to obtain the hematite to refine into an iron ingot without an iron ingot to build the mine shaft. So I actually had to scour the map for at least one actual raw hematite node. And the closest one I found, unfortunately, was way up here, which is why I have a mining job up here. And I've decided to mine out this node, which, as we can see, has finally completed. So I've got some hematite nodes mined. I don't believe they've been retrieved, actually. They've just been quarried, so they're still sitting way up there on the map. But now when somebody brings back the hematite and I complete the metalworks, I'll be able to turn it into an iron ingot, which in turn I'll be able to use to make a mine shaft here. So once again, my lack of foresight causes me unnecessary complications. If I'd thought about this a little bit more, I would have built this stuff in a different order. But that's okay. These two buildings can wait for that hematite. So, as I mentioned in the previous episode, I would like to speak to you about the role of crops in your Clockwork Empires colony. This might not be to everyone's interest, so if crop talk bores you, feel free to just zone out and watch the little colonists do their thing, and my voice will just be white noise. So, crop fundamentals. First of all, crops are an indispensable part of feeding your colony. You will probably never be able to feed your colony just on the basis of hunting and foraging alone, right? You can forage these black fungus things. I've set these lingonberry bushes also to be foraged. They will produce food, right? A bushel of lingonberries, which can be cooked at the kitchen and it'll produce food. Colonists prefer not to eat raw food, and even though like a raw basket of berries is just as nutritious as the cooked, preserved berries, colonists will be happier if they eat cooked food. That said, food obtained from foraging will probably never be enough to feed your entire colony, and certainly not as your colony's population continues to grow. And you'll want to continue growing your colony's population because it enables your colony to perform multiple jobs in parallel because you'll have more work crews. Each of these crews is able to form essentially one task or man one workshop. And you'll also need more workers in those work crews so that the crew assigned to a specific workshop, let's say the kitchen, can have multiple people. Oh, one of our ovens just busted. Anyway, so for various reasons, you'll want as many colonists as you're able to support, and being able to feed those colonists and keep them happy and stave off starvation and madness and whatever, like grumpy fistfights, you'll want to grow crops. And the manner in which this is done is we go to the Zones and Constructions button here, click on the Farm button, and then we drag out a plot. So as you can see, I've already plotted out 2 plots here for crops. Once plotted, once you've drawn out the farm field, you click on it and then you have your selection of crops. This can be set on a farm by farm basis, and you have a variety depending on the biome you're in. So right now in game there are only 2 biomes, the temperate biome and the jungle biome. The biome will determine what kinds of crops are available to you. So here in the temperate biome we have maize, which is corn, before it was corn. I believe our modern day corn plants are derived from native maize, native to North America. Maize, cabbage, wheat, pumpkin, these are all food crops. Then they're utility crops. Opium poppies, which they make opium, which you need for pharmaceutical stuff. Later in the game, when you teched up your colony. Bamboo, which is a source of building materials and can actually substitute for wood. It's pretty handy in the jungle biome specifically because the quality of wood in the jungle is not great. Even though there are trees, there are fewer of them and they don't produce quality timber like these aspen and pine trees do. And the flax plant, which produces bundles of flax which you spin at, or whatever you weave into cloth, basically. And the use for cloth at present is only for beds, but that's a very important use because places to sleep are very important for your colonists. Right, I can only build a bed if I have a bolt of cloth, which I believe I'll do right now, actually. This is my bunkhouse, by the way. Right, so I've just placed another bed there. Anyway, crops. So it used to be that crops all grew at a steady rate, and they would all produce the same amount. Over time, that has changed. So now, crops in their current implementation, they have a number of different factors. I've covered this in previous episodes. I'll just recap this quickly because this is all relevant. So crops now have a labor requirement, a crop yield stat, and a growth rate stat. And I'll deal with the yield stat first, since that's the most straightforward. Basically, one plant. This is how much one plant produces. So a pumpkin, for instance, produces a medium amount of produce. Basically, one plant produces approximately 1 pumpkin each time it reaches maturity. Whereas wheat, which is a high crop yield, will actually produce 4 bags of wheat flour per wheat plant, or per planting. This is balanced. This is subject to balance in that wheat grows very slowly, whereas pumpkin grows at a medium rate, and then you have plants like cabbage which grow at a high rate. Now, cabbage has the highest growth rate, but it also has the lowest yield. In theory, that means cabbage and pumpkin are approximately they'll produce approximately the same amount of food over time. The difference between those two is this third stat, the labor requirement. So, plants grow in stages. Okay, so before I get into that, something like pumpkin has a medium labor requirement, whereas something like cabbage has a high labor requirement. And it's kind of like, it's essentially how often a farmer needs to check in on the plant to keep it healthy. I'm just going to take the usual number of colonists, and actually, I'm going to grab the food supplies, just so I don't have to worry about food for a little while. A scholar has submitted a report about the colony. It is not favorable, but it has not affected my prestige. Those reports can go either way. They can be positive or negative or just ambivalent. Okay, getting off topic here. So, crops. So you have a number of different crops, and obviously the thing you want to do is to pick the crop that is most appropriate to your colony's situation and available labor, and that will produce the greatest amount of food for everyone to eat. Now the thing is, when we look at these, we're like, so cabbage grows faster, but it needs more work, and it doesn't produce as much cabbage, but it grows faster. So between cabbage and pumpkin, why would I pick one or the other? And then wheat grows slowly, but produces more. Does that mean it produces more than pumpkin over time, or less? Etc., etc. So the available crops are slightly different than jungle biome, but the same principles apply because they all have these crop stats. So what I did, I sat down, I played the game for some time, actually pulled up Netflix on my second screen, and I just what was I watching? I don't remember now. So over a couple of nights, as I was watching movies, I actually sat down and I counted the number of bushels of produce each crop produces over 10 days, and the same size plot, and always making sure there's enough labor, just to see what's what and how it works out. And what I can tell you is that cabbage and pumpkin are almost equivalent, even though their stats are kind of different because of a number of factors. At the end of the day, the number of pumpkins it produces is approximately 3/4 the number of pumpkin plants you have, and it will produce that each day. And the same goes for cabbage. Take the number of cabbage plants you have, multiply it by about 75%, and that's the number of cabbage you can expect on a daily basis. So in the long term, they produce approximately the same amount of crops. Whereas wheat takes a very long time to grow compared to these other crops. Wheat will only produce, it'll start growing and it'll grow very slowly over 4 days, 4 or 5 days sometimes. But at the end of the 4 or 5 days, it will produce 4 or 5 bags of wheat flour, which again, you take to your kitchen and cook into bread. Which means on a week-by-week basis, or even in 5-day chunks, wheat is actually more productive than cabbage or pumpkin. So why wouldn't we just always plant wheat? And the reason, first of all, if it's the very first crop, then you're going to be very hungry for the first 4 days. So maybe the first 4 days of your colony, you might want to grow pumpkin instead, because it will produce some pumpkins the very next day. What you can do is grow pumpkins initially and then grow a wheat field here. And then at the end of every day for the first 4 days, you'll have pumpkins. And on the 5th day, you'll have a bumper crop of wheat. Of course, wheat only produces an edible harvest once every 5 days. So you're going to have this, like a spike in your available food, approximately once a week. And then you're going to have no food production. Why would you pick, why is labor important? Why is the labor requirement important when picking crops for your fields? Well, all things being equal, wheat will produce the greatest yield over time. However, it is also the most volatile crop. That is to say, crops can die partway through their growing cycle. So if you have a plant that has a very short growing cycle, like cabbage or pumpkin, then if you lose some of it, and that can happen in many different ways, it's less of a recovery time is required to get it back up and running again. So I've got a cabbage field here. Let's say giant beetles stampede in the middle of town and destroy my crops, which actually happens sometimes. If I get back to planting pumpkin in that field, I will have pumpkin again the next day or whatever. If, however, I'm growing wheat, and on day 3 of wheat growth, beetles destroy my wheat crop, then not only did I not have wheat for those first 3 days, if I replant wheat, I'm not going to have wheat for another 4 or 5 days. So I've lost that effective. Basically, in that situation, it would have been better for me to grow pumpkin. So those are just some of the things you have to consider when you're picking crops. When you're able to have multiple crops, so I've been sustaining my colony on pumpkin, and the wheat crop is coming along. Once this wheat crop comes in and I have a giant pile of wheat, enough to sustain me, I might consider switching this pumpkin field also over to wheat, so that they're rotating and they alternate harvests, and I have a steadier flow of food, and the overall production is higher. So that's just some of the things you have to consider when you're picking your crops. On top of that, of course, you need to consider available labor. If you've got a billion workshops all working and no one available to farm, which is actually not the case here, fortunately, it might not be practical for you also to run many fields. But I would suggest that planting crops is probably your primary should be your primary concern. So you should actually limit your colony growth by the amount of fields you're able to sustain. You should in fact have as many fields as you can maintain with minimal spoilage. So if you've got, autosave firing off here. If you've got too many crops, an entire field gets planted all at once, right? So if you don't have enough people to maintain all those crops, the neglected plants die, which is terrible. Well, it's not as bad in a crop like cabbage or pumpkin, because the plant will die and then someone will just replant it and you'll have a pumpkin the next day. But again, if your wheat plant dies on day 3 because there weren't enough people to maintain it, then you've just lost 3 days worth of growth and you have to replant. So you want as many fields, as many plants in as many fields as you can maintain without any spoilage. And you want those fields to be able to feed practically your entire colony. And you also, and then when all of those requirements are filled, then you also want enough workers to staff all your workshops. So limit your growth by the amount of your food production, not by the number of workshops and things you have. So food production has become more complex. It requires more labor than in previous revisions, and it's actually more susceptible to crop damage. The beetle, what is it called? The ravenous herd event, which is the swarm of beetles event, they can just decimate your crop. That I'm sure there may actually have been one previous episode, or maybe not. Anyway, the ravenous herd event, giant beetles attack your colony. They're huge. They're the size of cows. Now, they won't hurt your colonists, and your colonists will eventually kill them, but until they die, they will eat your crops. When you kill the giant beetles, medium-sized beetles come out of their bodies. Medium-sized and tiny beetles. And those are giant pain in the butt because they scatter and your whole colony runs around trying to stomp on them and protect the crops. The end result of which is that you will probably lose all your crops, no matter how diligent you are. But on the plus side, all those beetles will give you tasty beetle meat to sustain your colony for a little bit. It's the net change to food is actually a bit of a loss. So you can also lose harvested crops when bandits come and steal them out of your stockpile. And although this doesn't happen quite as often, herbivores like the aurochs and the dodos and the new one. There's actually a new herbivore in this revision, the deer. Those, if you don't hunt them, which I always do, but if you don't stop them, they will also wander into town and eat your plant foods out of your stockpile. Same actually goes for the carnivores, like the fox. If you don't do anything about the foxes, they'll actually come into town and eat your bushel of sausages. So that's another problem, right? You can actually lose food, harvested food, even cooked food out of the stockpile. So that's the end of crop talk. There's actually an interesting forum in the official Gaslamp, official thread in the Gaslamp forums, where we discussed the ramifications of some of the crop changes. So that's the sort of thing you think might interest you. I'll actually post the link to that thread in maybe the comments section underneath, or not the comment section, yeah, underneath the video. There are colorful little graphs and stuff. Now, the reason I don't assign even more people to my military squad is because I've only got 4 guns. So, oh, we've got some fighting going on. Oh, this might go badly. Elsa Cole Scuffle. Oh, save her, Maud Brimble. No, somebody has just died. Enola Golden Ores. People are dying, and as a result, workshops are being abandoned, and I'm going to have... Well, in addition to people being dead, I'm also going to have staffing problems. So there's that. Okay. Too much stuff going on here. Wait a second. First of all, there are going to be a ton of corpses either way, so first I'm going to designate a graveyard. But this is what you get when you try and steal rough stone blocks from my stockpiles, bandit scum. So, Enola Golden Ores died out here. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Now I have, some bandits have died. I can just let their bodies rot in the fields, but that's going to upset my colonists. So I'm actually going to say, when bandits die, we will bury them. Oh my gosh, what's going on here? Animals are eating my crops. No, there's a beetle. Somebody get... Oh my goodness. No, not my wheat. If you have to eat a crop, please eat my cabbage instead. For the reasons I mentioned earlier, wheat, it's terrible to lose wheat because it has such a long growing cycle. Oh, the bandits have offered me a truce. Yes, let's end the bloodshed. Please stop shooting me. Oh my goodness. Okay. Huh. Well, free stuff. There's got a bunch of overlooked supplies. Flax straw, some minerals, all well and good. Oh, that was a chaotic couple of minutes. So, I've got 2 people free since their overseers died. I'm going to assign them where I think they would be most effective. I didn't lose any soldiers, though, which is good. I'm actually going to assign somebody, one person here to the kitchen, and... Oh, it looks like everybody's got at least 1 worker, so you can go here. Hopefully, we can... Oh, somebody has squished the beetle. He did a lot. That is a lot of damage to the wheat crops, though. Given that he ate, I don't know, 4 or 5 plants, and each of those plants was at day 3 or 4 of growth, he effectively destroyed, what, 12 days worth of wheat? So, that's the thing about crops. If your colony is very secure, if you've got it walled off in every direction, or you've got a ton of soldiers, then go ahead and by all means grow wheat. Wheat is probably your most productive crop. If, on the other hand, you suffer from beetle attacks and bandit raids and fish people come and jump up and down on your pumpkins, as they sometimes do, you might be better off growing cabbage or pumpkin. Because losing one of them, it does not hurt quite as much as losing wheat. And there's another beetle. Nope. Sylvester Bootburn got it. So there we have it. I would call that episode 3 of my Alpha 43 playthrough. I didn't get as much done as I generally do because, again, I spent a whole bunch of time talking, and that means my attention is split and I'm not as busy building stuff as I could be. Subsequent episodes should go much faster. I should be able to get much farther in construction. Anyway, so the game is Clockwork Empires. My name is Alfred. The game is developed by Gaslamp Games. It's in early access. It's available on Steam and stuff. Again, this is the stable branch, which comes out, which gets updated about once a month. I covered most of the stuff that was new with this monthly patch in episodes 1 and 2. So if for some reason you've reached the end of episode 3 without watching 1 and 2, I would suggest you go back and watch those. I hope these have been helpful. Thanks very much for watching. Well, have a good one.